In the horror genre, there's something special about that moment. There are just times when horror is so perfectly distilled into a single moment that we often come to associate those genre masterpieces with that one scene, whether it's the scene from that movie that's been burned into your head since childhood, or the passage from that book you'll always wish you couldn't recite from memory. Horror games can be challenging, requiring you to make difficult choices in order to survive and proceed through the tale. While there are many changes between games, you will constantly be faced with decisions that can make survival simpler or more difficult. Many terrible horror video games, on the other hand, have funny secrets beneath the surface. Here are the top 10 dumbest things hidden in horror games. Number 10. Protagonists are being dumbed down. The heroes of memorable and legendary survival horror films all have one thing in common: they don't make stupid mistakes. When the mansion is overrun by zombies, Chris and Joe from Resident Evil don't make any bad judgments. Alan Wake, on the other hand, makes a laundry list of baffling and eye-roll-inducing decisions throughout his game. As the gamer's portal into the universe, the protagonist must say and do things that make sense. The game should not be like a poor horror film. Instead, it should be like a scary short narrative with a strong protagonist. The audience for a horror film should be in the minds of the developers. The developers should pay attention if they believe the audience would scream at the screen. Don't go in there dumb. Number 9. Putting the lore and notes scattered around. In an RPG like Skyrim or a deep intricate universe like Assassin's Creed, leaving behind written entries or diaries to provide more color to the world is great. In a survival horror game where zombies are chasing you from room to room, it detracts from the experience and the story. When there are killer mutants on the loose, the last thing anyone wants to do is read the notes of mental patience. The backdrop should be presented to the gamer through actions and the environment they face to properly shock them. They shouldn't be reading about how everyone went insane for the majority of the game. Soma, a game with a difficult premise, would have benefited enormously with a more narrative narration of the events instead of the textual logs. Number 8. Placing creepy baby dolls throughout the house. I'm going to lose it if I played one more game with a collection of eerie shattered baby dolls. Old baby dolls are the most horrifying object on the face of the earth in real life. They are merely objects in video games. They are the same as a chair or a table. The dolls are placed in rooms by the developers in an attempt to simulate real-life dread in the game. To scare gamers even more, the game may have one or two baby dolls fall off the shelf or move about due to the fading battery inside them, however. That is no longer the case. That's a lot of nightmare fuel. Putting baby dolls in a creepy spot for the purpose of putting disturbing items in a creepy place does not make it creepier. The gamer ignores or is disturbed by the abundance of baby dolls, which has the exact opposite effect. It works in real life but not in games. Hence, it should be removed. Number 7. Gamers are being forced to collect fuel in order to see in the dark. Collecting fuel to advance through the game has become a standard feature in many survival games. In survival horror, the player must budget gasoline in order to see what is in front of them. There's nothing more irritating in video gaming than having to collect batteries or matches in order to proceed in a survival horror game. From Amnesia to Alan Wake, all of the major hitters mentioned above do this in some way. Instead of being a fearful little child in the corner screaming and begging the big terrible monster to go away, the player becomes more focused on supply and harvesting. Number 6. Only using darkness to terrify us. It's terrifying not to be able to see what's coming for you, and using light efficiently can add to the horror. However, the dark isn't the only thing that might frighten gamers. Slenderman is more menacing in the dark since he otherwise appears stupid. Making a game take place solely at night, or over the course of one night, on the other hand, is a bit of a stretch. It provides the impression that the game will only succeed if you are unable to see everything that is in front of you. Although Arkham Asylum is not a horror game, the scenes in which the player must overcome Batman's phobias are unnerving and frightening. They don't use the dark to create fear. Instead, they let the circumstances and atmosphere play with the gamer's imagination. Layers of Fear successfully blends dark and light horror themes to demonstrate that seeing something can make a player want to hide in the closet just as much as not being able to see. Number 5. Taking away the gamer's weapons. By disarming the gamer's persona, the Amnesia series took survival horror and made it more horrific. It was revolutionary in 2010, but it's time to put it behind us today. Developers encourage the user to proceed slowly through the game by removing the ability to resist against attacks. It's a cheap method to lengthen the game and make it appear more frightening. If the story, atmosphere, or character do not support having 0 weapons, this becomes inorganic or tiresome for the player. Daniel didn't know what he was fighting in Amnesia, Dark Descent, which assisted with the realism of not being armed. Taking weapons away merely to take them away makes the gamer wonder why this is even an option. Number 4. Being extremely gross for the purpose of being extremely gross. Torture films had their heyday in the early 2000s, but the theme continues to have a significant impact on gaming. In a survival horror game, there's something to be said for displaying guts and blood, but there's a line that many games cross. The Dead Space series is known for its gruesome imagery and creatures. Because it's a video game, many gamers are more tolerant of it than others. After all, it's just a bunch of polygons. The mutation of necromorphs, on the other hand, is unpleasant and gross only for the sake of being gross. They aren't the only ones, though, who abuse this. Outlast is a sequence where you must go through a series of trenches filled with body parts, guts, and blood. The creators want you to be terrified, but you're just ill. Number 3. Rural people being used as bad guys. Both Resident Evil 7 and Outlast 2 expand on the Hills of Ice theme. You may be the hottest new villain in survival horror games if you live outside of society's standards and detest outsiders like the plague. The only issue is its bad language and the fact that it is currently the most difficult horse for developers to beat. This tired stereotype of rural folk as terrifying monsters adds nothing to the gamer's motivation or belief in who he or she is fleeing from. The developer's explanation for why these individuals are behaving badly toward outsiders is that they withdrew to the forest and lost all sense of community and humanity. It's a lame excuse. People don't turn into murderous maniacs because they leave in the country. In survival horror games, the real motivation for the bad guys is crucial to the player's enjoyment. The participants must feel that those pursuing them have legitimate grounds for doing so. Number 2. To keep it linear, the door is half locked. Survival horror games must follow a set of rules in order to achieve the desired mood and tone. The terror element would be removed if the gamer had access to an open universe in which they could freely travel. As a result, developers have chosen to create a genuine environment with all of the doors and windows that actual buildings would have, but they have all been locked for the purpose of controlling the gamer. It's one thing to have 1 or 2 locked doors, but it's another to dump the gamer into a house with all the doors jammed and no way to unjam them. It would be preferable if the house only had 1 functional door and the rest was simply walls. Although the game would be ridiculous, the player would at least know it worked. Developers must accept the possibility that players will enter a room and discover nothing, then leave. To avoid this, locking or sealing the door will simply disrupt the survival horror game's flow. Number 1. Deadweight companion characters are being added. Escort missions are the dread of every video gamer. Escort missions have caused certain survival horror games to entirely fail. The escort missions in Resident Evil 4, for example, take all of the pleasure out of the game. Leon is in charge of protecting the president's daughter, and he fails miserably. However, not as bad as the devs who created the game's escort missions. That's all for today. See you next time with a lot more. Don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe to my channel. Thank you.